"I do not know the name," said Julian, Duke of Endersleigh, from a chair carried shoulder high through the market square of Cardenhoe. "Then it is nobody's." And he opened 2 fingers, and the petition of Ladywell Row, 27 names, some written and some crossed, went off the side of the chair and into the mud, and the whole town laughed. The woman who had held it up to him was left standing there with her hands still raised and nothing in them. Her name was Susanna Bray. It was written at the foot of the paper he had not read, the last of the 27, and it would be 11 years before he learned it. When he did learn it, he would be on his knees in that same mud, in front of that same town, reading every name on that same paper aloud, one after another, in the rain. It had begun an hour earlier with the bells. The Duke of Endersleigh was carried into Cardenhoe on the shoulders of 4 men in his own livery, in a chair hung with laurel and blue ribbon, above a market square 3 inches deep in mud. It was the custom of the borough that a member newly returned should be chaired from the town cross to the King's Head and back again, and in living memory the custom had never been kept at such expense. An ox had been turning in the square since morning. There had been beer at his Grace's charge in every house that would take it, and the bells had been rung since 8 by men too far gone in the Duke's ale to count the changes. The crowd that pressed about the chair was in the loose, happy temper of people who have been given something for nothing and have not yet been told the price. Julian, Duke of Endersleigh, was a tall, fair-headed man with a cool, handsome face, and the easy carriage of a man who has never had to ask twice, in a black superfine tailcoat, dove grey waistcoat, and a plain white cravat. He sat the swaying chair as a man sits a horse he has ridden all his life, one gloved hand loose upon the arm of it, and he looked down at the town the way a man looks at weather. Susanna Bray stepped out from under the awning of the corn stalls, directly into the path of the chair, and held a paper up over her head with both hands. She was a straight-backed woman with dark hair pinned plain, a level grey gaze and ink stains along the side of her right hand, in a deep crimson wool cloak worn thin at the hem. The mud came over her boots and dragged at her skirts. She did not shout, for she had never in her life shouted, but she held the paper high and kept it there, and the 4 men carrying the chair stopped, because there was no way forward that did not go over her. "Your Grace," she said. The petition of Ladywell Row. It is a curious thing about crowds that they will fall quiet for a quiet voice sooner than for a loud one. The square hushed in rings outward from the chair until the loudest sound in Cardenhoe was the fat dripping off the ox. The Duke looked at the paper without taking it. It was a long sheet, folded twice, closely written, and along the foot of it ran a column of signatures and crosses, some careful, some labored, 1 or 2 of them made with a hand that plainly had to be steadied. "Whose hand is this?" he asked. Mr. Ambrose Kell, the bailiff, a broad man in a plain black coat with a silver-headed staff, came forward through the mud at a half-run. "Bray, your Grace," he said. "The clerk's daughter. Nathaniel Bray keeps the borough book. It will be the Ladywell tenants, your Grace, about the pulling down." "Bray," the Duke repeated. He said it pleasantly and without the least interest, as a man repeats the name of a village he will not stop at. "I do not know the name. It is signed by the whole of the row," Susanna said. 27 households, your Grace. Every door on it. They ask only that the houses be left standing, and they will pay for the repair themselves. I do not know the name, he said again, and now he smiled, and the smile was for the crowd rather than for her, and that was the moment the thing was done. Then it is nobody's. He put out his hand, and the paper was placed in it, because a paper held up long enough to a duke will always end in his hand. He held it out over the side of the chair, opened 2 fingers, and let it fall. The square laughed. Not cruelly. Most of them, they laughed because they were drunk, and because he was above them, and because the paper had gone into the mud so neatly, and because it is easier to laugh with the man in the chair than to stand in the mud with the woman. The chair went on. The bearers stepped around her, and the crowd closed after it like water, and Susanna Bray was left standing in the middle of the market square of Cardenhoe, with her hands still raised and nothing in them. She did not pick the petition up. There was no sense in it by then. 100 boots had gone over it. She turned and walked home to Ladywell Row and told her father, and he took off his spectacles and cleaned them for a long time before he spoke. Nathaniel Bray was a small, dry, exact man in a rusty black coat, with spectacles pushed up into grey hair and a pen behind his ear. He had been clerk of the borough for 30 years, and there was nothing in Cardenhoe he did not know the history of, including the reason the Duke of Endersleigh wanted the north side of Ladywell Row on the ground. The Duke's people said it was improvement. There was to be a wider road up to the park gates, and a terrace of new houses with iron railings, and the crooked old street with its sagging roofs and its overhanging upper floors was an offense to the eye. All of that was true, and none of it was the reason. The reason was that Cardenhoe returned 2 members to Parliament, and that the right of voting in Cardenhoe did not lie in the men, but in the houses. 51 ancient tenements, and no more, carried the franchise. It had been so since the borough was first summoned. A man who held one of those doors had a voice, whatever else he was, and a man who held none had none. Though he were the richest grazier in the county, the vote went with the door, and not with the man. The Duke of Endersleigh held 22 of them. The other 29 were scattered among small owners, widows, a carpenter, a saddler, an old sailmaker who had bought his house out of prize money, and above all among the crooked north side of Ladywell Row, where 17 of the 51 stood shoulder to shoulder under one long slate roof. Pull down 17 ancient tenements, and 17 votes are extinguished with them, and can never be revived because the right lies in the fabric. A man cannot be turned out of a house that no longer exists. That was the improvement. He does not want the street, Nathaniel Bray said. He wants the arithmetic. They came for the borough book on a Tuesday. Mr. Gideon Thane, the Duke's man of business, a neat, colourless man in bottle green, with a leather case always under his arm, brought 2 carts and an order. The old papers of the corporation were to go up to Endersleigh Park to be sorted, and what was of no consequence was to be burned, and the clerk was to sign the certificate that the 17 tenements were ruinous and unfit and might be taken down. Nathaniel Bray refused both. He refused quietly, sitting down, with his spectacles pushed up into his grey hair, and he cited the custom of the borough for a quarter of an hour together, while Mr. Thane looked at the window. He was dismissed from the clerkship that same afternoon. The carts took the corporation chest, and the deed, and the poll books of 4 contested elections, and a great deal else that was afterwards said to have been burned in the brick yard behind the park, They did not take the borough book, because the borough book was not in the chest. Before the carts came up the lane, Nathaniel Bray had opened the cover of it and written across the inside, in the small exact hand he had used for 30 years, that the costumal of the borough of Cardenhoe was that day delivered into the safe keeping of his daughter Susanna Bray of Ladywell Row, and he had signed it as clerk, and Ambrose Kell had witnessed it, and so had Simon Rudd, a heavy, slow-spoken labourer with a scarred left hand and a hat he never put on indoors, who happened to be mending the fence and was called in off the lane to make his mark. Then Susanna put the book under her crimson cloak and walked out of Cardenhoe by the field path while the carts came up the road. It was a squat volume bound in green leather, the brass clasp broken and tied shut with a bootlace, and it contained the whole memory of the place, the charter and the customs, the tolls, the boundaries walked, and above all the polls taken from the beginning, house by house, door by door, in the old way, each entry naming the tenement, and then the man who held it. It was the only complete record in existence of how Cardenhoe voted, and why. The roofs came off Ladywell Row before the month was out. The Duke was in London and never saw it. Simon Rudd was one of the men who did it, because he had a wife and no work and the alternative was the parish, and he stood on a ladder and passed slates down to a cart and hated himself. And he told his wife that night that he had heard rain fall inside a house that had been dry 200 years. 17 families went out. Some went to the poorhouse, some to a cousin, 3 to the town of Wickburn where there was a mill. Nathaniel Bray, dismissed, lost his rooms with his office, and took a damp lodging over the saddler's, and the wet winter took hold of his chest and did not let go. He died at the turn of the year. His daughter buried him with what was left after the doctor was paid, and stood at the graveside in a deep crimson wool cloak worn thin at the hem, and the whole of the surviving row stood behind her in the sleet. Then she took the stage-coach to London with the green book in a canvas bag on her knees, and she did not come back to Cardenhoe for 11 years. Mr. Josiah Peck, a stooped attorney in a snuff-marked coat, with reading glasses on a black ribbon, had been her father's correspondent for 20 years upon matters of borough custom, and had never once seen his face. He took her in as a copyist, because her hand was better than his own, and because she asked for less than a man, and he kept her because within a 12-month she understood conveyancing better than his articled clerk. She lived in one room off Chancery Lane. She ate one hot meal a day, and often not that. She copied deeds by candle until her eyes ached, and she read in the evenings the only literature that interested her, the law of elections. And she learned the trade that had ruined her, which was paper. She learned that a burgage tenement could be bought like any other freehold, from anybody at any price the parties agreed, that it did not matter in the least whether the buyer were man or woman, so long as somebody could be found to occupy the door and cast the voice, that great families all over England had built their power in exactly this way. One house at a time, patiently, over generations, and nobody had ever thought it remarkable, because it had always been done by men with titles. There were 51 doors in Cardenhoe. The Duke had 22. 26 carried the borough. Susanna Bray wrote the arithmetic on the flyleaf of the green book under her father's endorsement, and began. She made herself 3 rules and never broke one of them. The first was that she would never buy in her own name. Every purchase went through Mr. Peck, and afterwards through a small firm of country attorneys at Wickburn, and the deeds were taken in the names of nominees, respectable dull men who held for her and were paid a guinea a year for the trouble. If Endersleigh knew a name, Endersleigh would know a price. The second was that she would always pay the full worth of the house, and a little over in ready money, and never in the year the seller was desperate. She had watched what a bargain looked like from the other side of the table. The third was the hardest and cost the most. She would put the roof on before she asked for the deed. Every house she took she repaired. Slates, sills, chimney, drains, and the family in it had a lease for the life of the tenant at the old rent, which could not be raised, and out of which they could not be turned. Not by her, not by anybody. It meant she could never make a shilling out of Cardenhoe. It also meant that every voter she made was a free man who owed her nothing, and she wanted that on the record, though it was 11 years before she understood how much she would need it. The first door took her 4 years to afford. It was the sailmaker's, at the top of the row, bought when his eyes went. The second and third came together from a widow in Wickburn who was glad to be rid of them. The fourth was won at auction in the King's Head against a bidder who never gave a name, and dropped out at £40 above the value, and Susanna, sitting at the back with her hood up, understood that she had just outbid the Duke of Endersleigh's agent for a house with a hole in the roof, and went out into the yard and was quietly, thoroughly sick. After that it went faster, because money makes money, and because Mr. Peck put her in the way of an annuity business that paid. 7 doors by the 6th year, 14 by the 8th. She took no holiday and bought no furniture and wore the crimson cloak until the nap was gone from it, and in the back of the green book, in the small exact hand she had learned from her father, she kept the tally of the doors, 1 line to a house, the date, the price, the family, the state of the roof. In the 11th year the tally stood at 27. 27 doors against the Duke's 22, in a borough where 26 was a majority, and Ladywell Row rebuilt along the north side in the old line, timber and slate, with the drains dug out and the lane pitched, and Simon Rudd, who had taken the roofs off, employed for 4 seasons putting them back on. The Duke of Endersleigh, in those years, had risen exactly as far as he intended to. He had married and had been widowed, and had not much noticed either. He had spent a fortune on a marble staircase, and another on hounds. He sat in the Lords and made 3 speeches a session, and his real weight in the world was measured, as such weight always was, by the number of members he could deliver in the other house, of which Cardenhoe's 2 were the safest and the cheapest he owned. There was talk of a place in the cabinet, and the talk depended on the arithmetic, and the arithmetic depended on the borough. Mr. Gideon Thane, a neat, colourless man in bottle green, with a leather case always under his arm, brought him the accounts twice a year, and was heard with half an ear. "Cardenhoe, Your Grace," Thane said that spring, "we are losing ground there. Buy it back. I have tried, Your Grace. Every house that has come on the market these 9 years has gone above value to a purchaser I cannot trace. The deeds are in the names of clerks and small farmers who have never lived in them. There is a hand behind it. I cannot find whose." "Breed," said the Duke, because the Earl of Breed was a florid, affable man in claret velvet, with rings on both hands, who wanted the county and made no secret of it. "It is not Lord Breed, Your Grace. I have made sure." The Duke was not troubled. He was never troubled. But that night, Standing at the window of the long gallery with a glass in his hand, he had one of those small, unaccountable turns of memory that come to men who do not examine themselves. A market square, a great deal of noise, and a red cloak standing in the mud. He could not think what had been happening, nor who had worn it. He supposed some woman had asked him for something. He went to bed. He did not send for Thane again about Cardenhoe. He sent instead for his parliamentary agent, and between them they found a shorter road, and it was a very good road, and it very nearly worked. The notice appeared in the London papers a fortnight after Susanna bought her 27th door. His Grace the Duke of Endersleigh, on behalf of the inhabitants of the borough of Cardenhoe, had petitioned Parliament for the restoration of the borough's ancient charter, which was stated to have been lost or destroyed. Under the charter as now recited, the right of election was declared to lie not in the burgage tenements, but in the mayor, 2 bailiffs and 10 aldermen of the corporation, and a schedule was annexed naming the 13 gentlemen who were to be the first corporation. Susanna read the schedule twice. The Duke's steward, the Duke's chaplain, the Duke's surveyor, 10 more of the same. Mr. Peck put his reading glasses up on his forehead and said what she already knew. If the house allows this, your doors are worth their timber, and nothing else. Not one of them will carry a voice. 11 years. And £140 a year of your money, and it goes out like a candle. Can it be resisted? Only one way. The petition stands upon there being no proof of the ancient custom. If the custom cannot be shown, the House will take the charter as recited, because there is nothing to set against it. If the custom can be shown, entry by entry, poll by poll, from time out of mind the petition falls, and the borough stands as it is. And the proof was in the corporation chest, Susanna said, which the Duke of Endersleigh burned in his brick yard 11 years ago. So he has been told there is no proof in England. That is why he has dared it now. That is why, Peck agreed. She went to the press and took out a squat volume bound in green leather, the brass clasp broken and tied shut with a bootlace, and set it on the table between them, and for a moment neither of them said anything at all. Then Mr. Peck sat back and rubbed his face with both hands and said the thing she had been avoiding for 11 years. A book is not evidence, ma'am. A book is a thing somebody must produce. Somebody must swear how it came into her hands, and be examined upon it before a committee, in public, at Westminster, and be cross-examined by counsel who are paid a great deal of money to destroy her. It cannot be done by a nominee. It must be you. Your name will be spoken in that room, and printed the next morning, and the moment it is. Every purchase you have made these 11 years will be gone through with a rake. They will say you have manufactured voters. They will say a woman has been buying a seat in the Commons in secret behind false names. They will not be wrong about the names. Susanna Bray looked at the green book for a long time. He said the paper was nobody's, she said, because he did not know the name. Very well, he shall hear the name. The Earl of Bray came to Chancery Lane within the week, having learned as much as anyone in England ever learned, which was that somebody in Cardenhoe held 27 doors and was about to lose them. He was charming. He offered to buy her whole interest at a valuation, and to carry the fight himself at his own cost with his own counsel, and she need never be named at all. It was a great deal of money, and it was in its way kindly meant. Your lordship would then hold the borough, she said. Somebody must, ma'am. I have been sold once already by a man who did not know my name, Susanna said. I do not intend to be bought by one who does. She spent the summer gathering what a committee would want. Ambrose Kell, still bailiff, still broad, still in his plain black coat with the silver-headed staff, had kept a poll book of the last contested election in his own house, because his father had kept it before him. Mrs. Deborah Tapp, a spare, upright widow in grey stuff and a starched cap, could speak to the custom as her husband had exercised it, and had a memory like a rat trap. And Simon Rudd came up to London on the outside of the coach, in his best coat with his hat in his hands, and put two things on Mr. Peck's table. The first was the written order under which the roofs of Ladywell Row had been taken off, signed by Gideon Thane, by his Grace's direction. The second was a long sheet, folded twice, stiff and brown and printed all over with the ghosts of boot-nails, which he had gone back for that same night 11 years ago, and dried on the hearth, and kept in the family Bible ever since, because it had seemed to him a wicked thing to leave a paper with 27 names on it lying in a road. The committee sat at Westminster in June, in a long room with tall windows on the river, and the Duke of Endersleigh attended in person, which he need not have done, and sat at the end of the second bench with his gloves in one hand. For 3 days it went as such things go, council and precedent, and the recited charter, and a great deal about the Corporation of 13. On the fourth morning council for the burgage holders rose, and said that he would prove the ancient custom from the borough's own book, and that he called Susanna Bray. The Duke of Endersleigh raised his head. The name meant nothing whatever to him. He had never in the whole of his life been introduced to a person of that name. What made him look up was the movement in the room, and the fact that the woman who came forward and was sworn was a straight-backed woman with dark hair pinned plain, a level grey gaze and ink stains along the side of her right hand, in a deep crimson wool cloak worn thin at the hem, which she did not take off, though the day was warm. She was 2 hours in her evidence. She produced the green book. She proved her father's endorsement inside the cover, in the small, exact hand of the clerk of the borough, delivering it into her keeping, witnessed by the bailiff and by a labourer, and both witnesses were in the room and swore to it. She read out the polls, beginning with the oldest and coming forward, the tenement first, then the holder, then the voice, door by door, in every poll ever taken in Cardenhoe, without one exception in 400 years. Counsel for the petition then had her for the rest of the day, and he was very good. He put it to her that she was the true petitioner behind the burgage holders. She agreed that she was. He put it to her that she had bought 27 ancient tenements in secret, under the names of men who did not live in them, in order to command the return of 2 members to Parliament. She agreed to every word of it, and asked leave to say how. He should not have let her. She said that she had never split a tenement to make 2 votes out of 1, and produced the deeds to show it. She said that she had never turned a tenant out of any house she bought, and produced the leases, every one for the life of the sitting tenant, at the rent it stood at when she bought, not to be raised, not to be determined, the tenant to hold whether he pleased his landlord or no. She said that of the 27 houses, 19 had been unroofed by the Duke of Endersleigh's own order 11 years before, and were now standing, slated, drained, and occupied, and that she had put the roofs back before she had asked any man for his deed. She said that she had never in 11 years asked one of those men how he meant to vote, and that if the committee wished, they might send for all 27 and ask them whether she had. And why, counsel said? Because he had lost the room and could not stop. Should a woman of no fortune and no connection devote 11 years, and the whole of her substance to the acquisition of a decayed borough? Because a paper with 27 names upon it was called Nobody's, Susanna said, by a gentleman who would not learn one of them. Counsel for the burgage holders then produced the petition of Ladywell Row, brown and stiff and marked all over with the prints of boot nails, and it was read into the minutes of the committee entire, the prayer that the houses of the row be suffered to stand, the offer of the inhabitants to bear the cost of repair themselves, and then the 27 names read out one by the clerk in the flat voice of a man reading a list. It took some time. The room, which had been restless for 4 days, was entirely silent for all of it. The Duke of Endersleigh sat at the end of the second bench with his gloves in his hand and looked at the back of a crimson cloak, and remembered, at last, and completely, where he had seen it. The committee reported 4 days later. The recited charter was not proved. The ancient custom was proved to the fullest extent. The right of election in the borough of Cardenhoe was declared to be in the burgage tenements as before, and the petition was dismissed with costs against the petitioner. Julian, Duke of Endersleigh, went down to the country and sent for Gideon Thane, and had the whole of Cardenhoe laid before him on the library table, which he had never once looked at in his life. There were 27 sheets. Each had a house, and the date it was bought, and the price, which was above value in every case, the name of the family in it, the date the roof went on. The first of the 27 was dated the week he had been chaired through the market square. "Whose are they?" he asked. "They are all one owner's, your grace. It is settled now beyond question. Miss Susanna Bray of Ladywell Row, Cardenhoe." "Say it again." Thane, who was a neat, colourless man in bottle green, with a leather case always under his arm, and who had not once in 19 years been asked to repeat anything, said it again. The Duke drove into Cardenhoe the following week. He had not been in the town for 4 years, and had never walked in it. He left the carriage at the cross and went up Ladywell Row on foot, and found a street of old crooked houses, new slated, the upper floors overhanging as they always had, the lane pitched and drained, geraniums in half the windows, and every door he passed shutting quietly as he came level with it. He knocked at the last house. She was at the vestry, he was told, over the accounts. He stood in the road for 40 minutes with his hat in his hand, a tall, fair-headed man with a cool, handsome face and the easy carriage of a man who has never had to ask twice, in a black, superfine tailcoat, dove-grey waistcoat, and a plain white cravat, waiting in the wet on a woman who was not at home to him, while the whole row watched him do it from behind the curtains. When she came, she did not raise her voice, because she never had. He said what such men say, that he had been ill-advised, that he had not known the circumstances of the row, that he wished to make it right, and would settle whatever sum she thought proper upon the families, and upon her, that there was a house of his at her disposal, that it might all be arranged quietly, between themselves, and there was no need for the thing to be talked of further in the county. "You did it in the square," Susanna Bray said. The writ came down in September, and Cardenhoe went to the hustings. The square was as it had been, the market cross, the King's Head, the mud after 3 days of rain, and the chair standing empty on its trestles, by the inn door with last year's laurel gone brown on it. There was no ox this time, and no beer, because Mr. Thane had advised very strongly against it. The bailiff opened the proceedings and read the committee's report to the borough, and then began, as the custom was, to call the burgage holders by their doors. Everyone in that square knew the arithmetic by then. 22 for the Duke of Endersleigh, 27 for a woman in a red cloak standing at the bottom of the hustings steps with a green book under her arm. The Duke went up the steps. He was heard in complete silence, which is a worse thing than being shouted at, and he knew it. Then Susanna Bray came forward and took out of her sleeve a long sheet, folded twice, brown and stiff and printed all over with the ghosts of boot nails, and held it up over her head with both hands so that the whole square could see what it was, and let it fall in the mud. Nobody laughed. Nobody in Cardenhoe moved at all. Julian, Duke of Endersleigh, came down the hustings steps into the square and went down on both knees in the mud in his black superfine tailcoat and picked the petition of Ladywell Row up out of the wet with both hands. He got up with his knees black to the thigh and his gloves ruined, and he did not brush himself, and he read it aloud, standing in the rain to the whole town. He read the prayer of it, that the houses be suffered to stand. He read the offer of the inhabitants to bear the cost themselves. And then he read the names, all 27 of them, slowly. And where a name was a cross, he read out the name written beside it, and where he was not sure of a name, he stopped and asked the bailiff how it was said, and was told, and said it correctly, and went on. The last name on the list was Susanna Bray. He said it once, and looked up from the paper, and said it again to her. Then he said, in front of the whole borough, that he had refused 11 years ago to learn the name of a woman who had asked him for nothing but leave to keep a roof on, that he had extinguished 17 ancient tenements to extinguish 17 voices, and had broken the clerk of the borough for refusing to help him do it, that he had petitioned Parliament to take from Cardenhoe a right it had held for 400 years, and had done it in the borough's own name without ever asking the borough, and that he withdrew it and undertook upon his honour, on that spot, never to move it again while he lived. And then he asked, aloud, from the mud, whether he might be permitted to stand for the town. Her terms were read out by Ambrose Kell from the hustings, so that no one should afterwards say they had been made in a back room. The tenants of Ladywell Row were to hold for their lives and their heirs after them, at the old rents, and the 27 houses were never to be pulled down, while any of them stood upright. The borough book was to go into a new town chest with 2 locks and 2 keys, one kept by the bailiff and one kept by her, and no paper of the corporation ever again to leave Cardenhoe upon anybody's cart. The name of Nathaniel Bray was to be written back into the roll of the clerks of the borough, in its place, with the date of his dismissal struck through, and the clerkship to be filled thereafter by the town's own choosing and no one else's. And of the 2 members Cardenhoe returned, one was the town's, entirely, and never his, and the second he might have, if he asked for it, aloud, from that platform, in that square, at every election in person, and not sent down in a letter from London. He agreed to all 4. He was returned for the second seat that afternoon, which was in the whole of his political life the only seat he ever had to ask for. They did not chair him. The chair stood empty on its trestles all afternoon and was taken away at dusk. What the town carried shoulder high, across the square in the rain, with the bells going badly as ever, was a squat volume bound in green leather, the brass clasp broken and tied shut with a bootlace, carried from the vestry to the new chest in the market hall by 4 men, one of whom was Simon Rudd. Susanna Bray walked behind it, in a deep crimson wool cloak worn thin at the hem with the 2 keys in her hand. The Duke of Endersleigh stayed on in the county through the winter, and did what a man does when he has nothing left to spend but attention. He mended a bridge at his own charge because the Row used it. He sat on the vestry and said very little. He learned, slowly and at some cost to his self-command, that a man who has been publicly forgiven is not the same thing as a man who has been publicly excused. In the spring he asked her whether he might call. She said that he might write. His first letter was returned by the receiving house, because he had directed it, out of an old habit of mind, to the lady at Cardenhoe. He wrote the second one out 3 times before he was satisfied with the direction, and stood a long while looking at it before he sealed it, at a line of writing in his own hand that had cost him a borough, a place in the cabinet, and 11 years of another person's life to learn, Miss Susanna Bray, Ladywell Row, Cardenhoe,